In our final lesson for this week, I'll be covering the conditional and iterating functions, if, for, and while. I'll show you how to use these functions to take a few lines of code which populate your entire canvas with varying elements. This will allow you to create highly dynamic sketches by leveraging looping and conditions, and will prepare you to complete this week's assignment. Let's jump into processing, and I'll show you how to work with if, for, and while.
Okay, so here we are in processing, and I have a new sketch that I've put together here, and this is going to be a sketch that's going to allow me to show you how to demonstrate working with the if, for, and while functions. So let's walk through what I have set up so far. First, at the top here, I have a few global variables. I have an integer x that I declared with starting value of 25, and an integer y with a starting value of 25. Then I started my own color palette. This was generated by using the cooler.adobe.com. Next, I have my setup code block. The setup code block is just giving my canvas size of 800 by 600, and then it's putting my background color as entry 0 of my color palette here. Next, in the draw code block, this is the code block that's going to run after the setup code block, and that's going to loop over itself until it is called to stop. So here what I have is an ellipse being drawn, and the location value is being cited by the x and y variables. There's no fill on the ellipse. The stroke color is being decided from our palette, and it's being drawn from variable r, which we set this up in our last video. And what this was we are storing a random number in the variable r, and then calling that random number and converting it into an integer when it's time to draw our ellipse. And this allows the ellipse, each time a new ellipse is drawn, it will select a color randomly from our palette. Now I set up the random number to go between 1 and 5, and that means it'll select a number between the last 4 of our color palette. So let's take a look and see what this looks like so far when we run this, and then we'll get started working with if, for, and while. Okay, so here's our background color, and then we have our ellipse being drawn in the upper left. And if you notice, the ellipse is currently being drawn on top of itself. That's why it looks like it's changing colors. That's how the draw function works. It cycles over on top of itself indefinitely until a no loop function is called. So what we want to do is we're going to take advantage of the looping of the draw function, and we're going to insert, first of all, a few if statements. And we're going to use those statements to draw ellipses evenly across both the x and y axis, so that we're going to fill the entire canvas with randomly colored ellipses that are just sitting right next to each other. So we're just going to write a few if statements here below the ellipse line in our draw code. And this is how you format an if statement. So the first thing that you do is you type if, and that's going to turn green, and then you open your argument, and inside your argument is going to be what you want to test. And in this case, we want to test x, and we want x to be less than the width of the screen. So we're asking the compiler, is x less than the width of the screen? If it is, you're going to open a curly bracket, and I'm going to go ahead and place my closing curly bracket for good practice here. And anything that goes inside of these curly brackets is going to be what is executed. So what I want to do is I want to increment, so I'm going to do an add a sign, so x add a sign 50. So this is going to scoot our ellipse over on the x-axis 50. Alright, so let me take a look, and this should run as it does right now, and this should just draw an ellipse evenly across our x-axis. This is how you write an if statement. Excellent. So the if statement allows the program to make a decision about which code to execute. If the test evaluates to true, the statements enclosed within the block are executed, and if the test evaluates to false, the statements are not executed. So once it becomes false, it stops running. Okay. Now, something that's cool with if statements is that you can embed or nest if statements inside if statements. So I'm going to nest another if statement inside of our if statement. So this is going to be inside of the curly brackets of this first if statement. I'm going to go ahead and type a second if statement. So this time, if, and this is what we're going to test, is what's inside the argument field. If x is greater than the width, this time instead of less than, width, then we're going to open a new set of curly brackets, and again, for good practice and to avoid confusion, I'm going to go ahead and put my closing. As you can see, we have nested here 3 different levels of curly brackets. So now inside of here is where I'm going to type my code, and we're going to do an add a sign, but this time with y. So we're going to move the y value, add a sign, down 50 pixels. And we're going to reset x so that it put x back at the beginning of its initial spot, so that each time y moves, the x value resets so that it can draw a new line of ellipses. So we're going to say x is going to resume its initial state, and if we recall, the initial state for x was 25. So we're just going to say x is then equal to 25 at that moment. Okay, so now if we press run on this, what we should see ellipses filling the entire canvas, and they will be generated with random colors. Excellent, great. So here what we've done is we've written an if statement, and then we've embedded or nested another if statement inside of our if statement. So we're asking 2 questions at once. And we're using the looping of the draw function to take advantage of asking these questions each time we go through the statement. Well, what if we didn't want to have the loop function and we just wanted to execute the code once? Well, that's where you would use the for statement. The for statement is going to allow you to control a sequence of repetitions. A basic structure for the for statement has 3 parts: the initial statement, the test, and then the update. So this is going to allow us to do exactly what we did with the if statements, but in a simpler bit of code. So let me show you how that works. What I'm going to do here is erase some of the code we have here, and we're going to write 2 for statements, and those for statements are going to do the exact same thing that our sketch does here, but without using the looping of the program. So the first thing that I'm going to do is in our void setup area, I'm going to type no loop. And this means that when the program gets to the draw function, it's only going to execute the code inside the draw function once. Then I'm going to go up here to our if code, and I'm going to erase this because we're going to set this up with our for statements. So this is how the for statement's going to look. Just going to put our comment here so we know where we're placing this. Okay, so when you write a for statement, I mentioned that it takes 3 arguments. First is setting up your initial value. So I'm going to say that our integer x is equal to 25. So that's our variable x, that's our initial value. We're just reminding the program to set that to 25, which is what it should already be at anyways. Then we're going to do our test. And the test is going to be, is x less than the width of the screen? And if you notice, I'm putting semicolons at the end of each of these arguments instead of commas, just a little bit different. And then the next is what is going to be the update upon this for statement. And that's going to be an add a sign, x, add a sign, 50. Close this. And then just like we did with our if statement, we're going to nest another for statement inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the curly bracket here for this, and in this time I'm going to put the curly bracket on the outside of the code. So the way that this works is that the code that draws the ellipse is now inside of our for statement, whereas with our if statement we were simply putting that below all of our draw code. Well, this time, because the draw function as the code block is not looping, we're going to keep the looping inside of our for code block. That's this area seen here. So now what this does is this is going to draw the x's across just the x-axis of the screen. So let's make sure that that's working at this point, and then we will nest the y-axis. Okay, that looks good. That's exactly what we expected. So we're going to nest now one more for statement. And this is going to be similar, except this is going to test the y. So we're going to set our initial value for y to be 25. Then we're going to ask, is y less than the height of the screen? And then we're going to add a sign, 50. Close this, and then we need one more set of curlies here. Just make sure you get those in there. If you ever forget one of your curlies, your program will not run. Okay, so if I build this, this is going to execute these two for statements, and then it's going to stop the loop, so that the draw code won't be running anymore, and that we'll be left with a static flat 2D image. So let's go ahead and do that. Excellent. So what we've got here is, instead of using the draw code block and its own looping, we've disabled that with no loop, and then we've called our for statements. And those allow us to control a sequence of repetitions so that this code will only loop over itself while these are in play. And once they are no longer in play, once these are no longer qualified, they will stop looping and the program will cease to run. And that will leave you with the output of your image, a flat 2D static image. Great. Let's move on to the final function that we'll be covering today, and that is while.
Now we'll take a short break to see how things are going with a brief quiz.
The last statement that we're going to be working with is the while statement. The while statement is a loop that controls a sequence of repetitions. The while structure executes a series of statements continually while the expression is true. And the expression must be updated during the repetitions, or the program will never break out of the while statement. That can be dangerous because the code inside the while loop will not finish until the expression inside becomes false, and subsequently it will lock out other code from running, such as your mouse or any keyboard events. So be careful. If you use this incorrectly, it can lock up your code, and sometimes it can even lock up the processing environment itself. So I'm going to erase the portion of our code here that was our for statement here. Okay. And we're going to construct a while statement. And this while statement is going to say while, and then it's going to test the variable that we will create in just a moment called counter. And that counter is going to be moving incrementally up to the number 100. So our while statement here is going to run 100 sequences, drawing 100 ellipses. So I'm going to open the curly brackets, place the closing curly brackets down here, and I'm going to make a few modifications to our global variables. First of all, I'm going to change these integers to floats because I'm going to be generating some random numbers that will replace these variables, and those random numbers will be floats. I'm also going to create a new float called counter and give it an initial starting value of 0. This is the number that we're going to update while we go through our code. So let's make a few things, few changes here in our while statement so that as it loops through, we're going to get different ellipses of varying sizes and in varying locations. So first thing that I want to do is under no fill here, I'm going to say x, and each time that it goes through the while statement, I want it to update x to a random number anywhere inside the width of the drawing. And then the y, same thing, a random number anywhere inside the height. Okay, and then one more thing, I'm going to create a local variable called d, and d is going to update the dimensions of our ellipse, and that's going to be a random value up to 200. So give us a little bit of variety. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the counter to increment by 1 each time that this statement executes on top of itself. So if we review this while statement, we have while the condition of variable that we created, counter, is less than 100, you're going to pick a random number and draw with the following settings an ellipse based off of the x random of the width, y random of height, and the dimensions random of 200, and then you're going to increment the variable counter by 1. So this is going to draw 100 random ellipses on our screen. Let's run this. We might have some errors and see if we have any. Nope, looks good. Excellent. Okay, so this is drawn 100 random ellipses onto our screen. So we could add a little bit more variety simply by typing random for the stroke weight and give that a little bit more variety here. Let's see what that looks like. Excellent. So this is 100 random ellipses being drawn onto our screen. Okay, so what we've done is we've been able to create 3 different code block dynamic drawings. One with the draw function and an if statement, one with the draw function and a for statement, and the last with a while statement. We used the looping of the draw function with our if statement, and we disabled looping by putting no loop in our setup code for our for and while functions. So given what we've covered so far this week, you should have all the tools you need to complete your next assignment, creating your own dynamic drawing using processing.